They say all good things must come to an end, and the next series of Salvage Hunters, which we shot last year and airs in the autumn, is my last. So everyone, take care. Thank you so much.
Drew Pritchard built his entire career on seeing value where nobody else could. To millions of viewers, he was the man who walked into abandoned factories, dusty barns, and forgotten estates, and somehow found something remarkable every single time. On Salvage Hunters, he came across sharp, confident, and endlessly enthusiastic about breathing new life into old treasures. But while the world saw a man living his dream, Drew was quietly carrying the weight of heartbreak, exhaustion, and personal tragedy that would eventually take him to one of the darkest points of his life. Before television ever arrived, Drew had already spent decades working in the antique world. He knew the trade better than almost anyone, and people trusted his eye. But when Salvage Hunters launched, everything changed. Almost instantly, Drew became more than a dealer, he became a celebrity. Fame wasn't something he chased, but it arrived fast and hit hard. Suddenly, he was filming year-round, traveling across the UK and Europe, waking up before sunrise and juggling deals, restoration projects, and the non-stop pressure of keeping viewers engaged. It was the kind of success most people dream of, but for Drew, it also came with a level of pressure he had never faced before. The cameras didn't turn off just because he was tired or stressed. He had to perform, negotiate, and smile even on days when his personal life was collapsing behind the scenes. One of the most painful moments came when his marriage to Rebecca ended. Fans were stunned, not just because they had been partners for so long, but because their chemistry seemed unbreakable. They were a team in every sense, in business, in life, and on screen. But the reality was far more fragile than viewers knew. Their split wasn't a quiet breakup. Because they were public figures, it immediately became something people commented on, speculated about, and even argued over online. And although they continued working together for the sake of the show and the business, the emotional cost for Drew was enormous. For the first time, the confident and composed antique expert looked like a man struggling to keep his balance. But the pressure didn't stop there. Not long after, Drew became involved in a violent confrontation at a pub. An incident that quickly spiraled into headlines. What should have been an ordinary evening turned into a chaotic mess that left him physically hurt and emotionally shaken. The story spread fast, and with it came judgment from people who didn't know him, didn't know the context, and didn't care about the impact. For someone whose career depended on public trust, this was a brutal blow. It was the first time Drew saw how quickly the internet could turn on someone, and how hard it was to rebuild a reputation once it had been dented. Even after the situation settled down, that night stuck with him far longer than most people realize. Around the same time, Drew started losing key members of his team, people who had been with him since the early days of Salvage Hunters. Some stepped away for personal reasons, others left after behind-the-scenes disagreements that were never fully explained. For Drew, this wasn't just about replacing staff. These were friends. They were part of the show's heart and soul. Their departures left emotional gaps that Drew struggled to fill. The energy of the show changed, the dynamic shifted, and suddenly he was carrying more responsibility, more decision-making, and more pressure than ever before. The cheerful, fast-talking antique hunter viewers loved was slowly being replaced by a man who was tired, deeply tired. Fans online started noticing subtle changes. Drew looked thinner in some episodes and worn out in others. His voice sometimes sounded heavy, and his energy seemed drained. Rumors began circulating about his health. Some wondered if he was overworked. Others worried something more serious was going on. But Drew rarely spoke publicly about his struggles. He kept moving forward, even when the exhaustion was written all over his face. That's the thing about someone who has spent their whole life working. Slowing down feels like failure, even when your body is begging for a break. But everything changed when Drew faced one of the most devastating moments of his life, the loss of a close family member. It was sudden, painful, and overwhelming. The kind of loss that shakes a person to their core. This wasn't something he could work through or hide behind a busy schedule. It stopped him in his tracks. People who knew him personally said that this tragedy hit him harder than anything he had ever dealt with. It became the moment where all the stress, all the heartbreak, and all the pressure finally came crashing down. For the first time, Drew began pulling away from the spotlight. He reduced his public appearances, spent more time alone, and allowed himself a kind of silence he had never embraced before. The tragedy forced him to rethink everything about his life. For years, he had been pushing himself non-stop, filming season after season, running a massive business, and dealing with personal storms that would have flattened most people. Now he started to see how much of himself he had lost along the way. He stepped back from certain responsibilities, let go of projects that no longer brought him joy, and tried to reconnect with the passions that originally made him fall in love with antiques. It wasn't an instant recovery. Grief never works that way. But it was a slow, deliberate process of rebuilding. What is most admirable about Drew is that even at his lowest, he never abandoned the world he loved. He still finds comfort in discovering forgotten pieces of history and restoring them to their former beauty. That passion has always been his anchor, and even during his darkest moments, it never disappeared. Today, he is quieter, more private, and far more selective about what he puts his energy into. He's learned that fame can take a massive toll, and that the cost of being always on isn't worth sacrificing your mental and emotional health. Drew Pritchard's story is a reminder that even people who seem strong, successful, and full of life can be carrying pain that never makes it onto the screen. Behind the deals, the jokes, and the long drives across the country was a man dealing with heartbreak, loss, and exhaustion that he rarely allowed the world to see. His journey shows that sometimes the greatest struggle isn't in finding treasures, it's in trying to hold yourself together when everything around you is falling apart. And yet, like the antiques he restores, Drew is proof that even when something has been damaged by time, pressure, or tragedy, it can still be repaired. It may take time, it may take patience, it may require stepping away from the noise and focusing on what truly matters. But with enough care, even the most broken pieces can shine again. And that is exactly what Drew Pritchard is quietly working toward: rebuilding, healing, and rediscovering the parts of himself that fame, stress, and tragedy nearly destroyed.